I'm going to tell you about my crazy trip that I did around 2 years ago, or maybe 1.5 years ago. It was kind of a crazy trip, and I will show you. You can see this yellow line shows where I went. I started here in London and I went round and eventually came back to London. Let me tell you about my trip. I started here in London. Sorry, I started here in London. That is because I live in the south of England. I live quite close to London. I live in the south of England. And I flew. I flew from London all the way to New York. So I flew from London to New York. I took a plane. I took a plane from London to New York. And this flight took around 8 hours. So the flight took 8 hours to travel from London to New York. And so on the plane we crossed the Atlantic Ocean here. We crossed the North Atlantic Ocean on the plane. Then I arrived in New York. Now, I was very lucky here. I was very lucky because in New York, my brother had an apartment in New York where I could stay. And he was not in the apartment, he was in a different country. So I was very lucky that I could stay in his apartment, and his apartment was in the area of New York called Manhattan. Okay, so it was in Manhattan, right here. You see the name here, Manhattan, and the apartment was in the south of Manhattan. The view was amazing from the apartment, and I could stay there for 1 month. I was very lucky for this. I did lots of things in New York. I saw the Empire State Building. I saw the One World Trade Center. I saw Brooklyn Bridge. I saw lots of things. I saw Times Square, all kinds of famous places in New York. After 1 month in New York, I got on a bus and the bus drove south. So the bus drove south from New York down to Philadelphia. And Americans call this city Philly. It's a name, yes, Philly. So I traveled south to Philly and I stayed in Philly for 2 days. And after staying in Philly for 2 days, I traveled south again. I went past Baltimore. I traveled past Baltimore, so I did not stay in Baltimore here, this city here. I traveled past Baltimore and I went to Washington. Washington is the capital city of the USA. In Washington, I saw lots of famous landmarks. Yes, famous landmarks like the White House and the Capitol building, and lots of famous things. The Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial. I saw lots of famous things here in Washington. After Washington, I did not fly. Most people would probably fly around America, around the US. I didn't. I took a bus. No, that's a lie. That's a lie. I took a train. So I took a train from Washington to this city here called Charlotte here. So I traveled from Washington to Charlotte. So we traveled through the state of Virginia. Here, this is the state of Virginia. And we traveled south to Charlotte. And Charlotte is in the state of South Carolina. So I traveled down to the south, down into South Carolina. I stayed in Charlotte for a couple of days, I think, and then I took a bus and we drove. The bus drove from Charlotte south to this city called Savannah. This was about a 3 hour journey, something like that. It took around 3 hours to travel from Charlotte to Savannah. Savannah is famous, I think, for being the first city in the US to ban alcohol. I could be wrong. It's famous for something like that. Anyway, after Savannah, I took another bus to Jacksonville, and I only stayed in Jacksonville for one night. Then I took another bus to Orlando. Yeah, this took about 3 hours as well. Orlando is where you can go to Disney World or Disneyland, Florida, where we are now. So I passed through the state of Georgia. Savannah was in Georgia. And then I traveled south. And now this section here, this is called Florida. This is Florida in America. In Orlando, you can go to Disneyland. I did not go to Disneyland in Orlando because I'm not a 13-year-old girl. And then I traveled from Orlando to Miami, I think on the train, if I remember. I think I took a train from Orlando to Miami. It took around 2 hours, 3 hours, something like that. Then I stayed in Miami for a couple of weeks. I stayed in a hostel. I had fun. I explored Miami. It's a cool city. There's a big beach, Miami Beach. And then I did something kind of crazy. I took a cruise. Yes, I took a boat. So I took a cruise ship from Miami to the Bahamas. Yes, that's right. We departed from Miami, and then we went to Nassau in the Bahamas. This is the capital city of the Bahamas here. And I was there for one day. I was there for around 6 hours only. And then the cruise ship, traveled across the sea, and now we are in the Caribbean. So this area of the world is called the Caribbean here. So we traveled through the Caribbean and we went to the island of Puerto Rico, which is right here. The name is not coming on the map, but this is Puerto Rico here. So yes, this is Puerto Rico, and they speak Spanish in this country. The interesting thing about Puerto Rico is actually part of the US. So when you arrive in Puerto Rico, they will say, "Welcome to the United States of America." It's kind of strange because I'm in Puerto Rico, but it's part of the United States. I was in San Juan, the capital city of Puerto Rico, and then the boat went to the Dominican Republic here. The boat came here. And so this is where I wanted to visit, the Dominican Republic. I wanted to practice my Spanish in this country, but quickly I found out that trying to practice my Spanish here was not going to work because the accent in this country is very different, and I could not understand anybody in Spanish while I was here. So anyway, I did not practice much Spanish, but I had a good time. I went to Puerto Plata, which is on the north coast. This is on the north coast of the Dominican Republic, this small city called Puerto Plata. And then I went to Santo Domingo. This is the capital city of the Dominican Republic. It is on the south coast of the country. And then I traveled to the east coast over here to Punta Cana. Punta Cana is a famous place for tourists to visit because there are amazing beaches in Punta Cana. And so I traveled to the east coast. And then after that, guess what? The trip gets even more crazy because I took a boat again. I took a boat all the way across the Atlantic Ocean. Yes, I know that sounds crazy, but I did not fly home to the UK. I took a boat home. And so I traveled by boat, first of all, to Puerto Rico, and then I went to many Caribbean islands here. I went to Philipsburg, this city here in this island. I went to Martinique, which is an island which was owned by the French many years ago. It was a French island. And then I went to Barbados for, 6 or 7 hours, and then began a very long journey. It took about 6 days. It took 6 days to travel from here in Barbados across the Atlantic Ocean. Yes, I know, 6 days. And after 6 days, we ended up in this island called Madeira here. It's a Portuguese island. It's an island of Portugal. And I went to this city, Funchal. And then the boat continued to Casablanca in Morocco here. So it went to Casablanca, Morocco. But the thing is, I had already been to Casablanca in the past. So I did not really explore Casablanca while we were there, because I had already seen it 2 years before that. Okay. After Casablanca, the boat went through this gap here. This is called the Strait of Gibraltar in the south of Spain. Eventually, we went to Barcelona, and I got off the boat at Barcelona. That was a long trip, but my trip was still not finished, because I did not fly home from Barcelona to London. Instead, I took trains, or buses. I took a bus from Barcelona to Montpellier, and I stayed in France here. And so I stayed in Montpellier for 2 days. Then I took another bus from Montpellier to Lyon, another city in France. Finally, I took a train, a very fast, high-speed train from Lyon to Paris there. And then finally, on the same day, I took the Eurostar train back from Paris to London. So there is a train that goes under the water. It goes round here, it crosses under here, underneath the water, under the water. It's called the Eurostar, okay, the Eurostar, and the train goes under the water and over to London. And finally, I was home. So that was my crazy trip. You may be thinking, wow, you're so rich. But actually, I was working while I traveled. I was teaching English online while I did this trip. So that is how I paid for the trip, is by working on my laptop at the same time as traveling. Anyway, that is the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed hearing about my crazy trip.